Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now my guest today is Justin King, the man who made Sainsbury's great again. Over a 10-year period as chief executive, he restored the fortunes of the supermarket giant. And I'll tell you what, we could all taste the difference. And while he claims it's still where he does most of his shopping, he's since swapped the supermarket for the promise and profits of private equity. And you know, they even called him Tigger because of his boundless energy. Justin, welcome to the show. Can you energise us?
Well, I'm going to try, Michael. I'll try, but I think after that introduction, I'm coming second best.
Well, tell us about the Sainsbury's years, first of all, in terms of what you took out of it. What's the big moment for you when you look back?
Well, look, you sort of done my job for me. I was there 10 years. It was a business that had fallen on tough times when I got there in 2004. But we called the turnaround plans Making Sainsbury's Great Again because that was really the challenge. It was a once great business. It was founded in 1869, so it'd been going 140-odd years, and we tried to give it back some of that greatness.
So it's almost like the Donald Trump of the supermarket.
Well, I think he stole that from me. I like to think he stole that from me.
You're right. So, I mean, in terms of, you know, a big store like that, getting to grips with it, giving it a new lease of life, were there any sort of, like, silver bullets there, or was this a much broader range of actions when you lead a business like that?
Well, I mean, people talk about retail being detail, and it's 1,000 things done slightly better than the people that you're competing with. But you know, the core secret to any retail business is to focus on who your customers are, and Sainsbury's had lost sight of their core customer. My mum was a loyal customer. She hated shopping in Sainsbury's when I went there, and she told me what needed to be improved. That was a good bit of the business.
So was Mrs. King the bellwether? The internal
absolutely. All chief execs should run a business for their mums. And then your colleagues, what we call the people that work in Sainsbury's stores. Sainsbury's had about 150,000 of them, and every day they were seeing how that business was letting customers down. So getting them aligned behind doing a better job for customers was key.
So I've interviewed both Terry Leahy and Stuart Rose on the show before, and it sort of feels like you guys represent the kind of A-team of sort of the British supermarket scene. I mean, is it kind of like, you know, police were simply getting younger when you get older and they don't make them like that anymore? Is there something about your generation in terms of the sort of entrepreneurial chief as opposed to the more corporate chief executive, or do you just think it was just a different era?
Well, I like to think that I was the next generation after Terry and Stuart.
Well, the young whippersnapper.
I was the young whippersnapper. They were both pretty experienced chief execs when I came on the scene. But look, the reality is one of the reasons we know the leaders of many of our retail businesses is a lot of what you do is in the public domain. You know, every quarter you're talking to your results, you're on the television talking about that. And I used to take the view that that was an opportunity to talk to the 150,000 colleagues and the 25 million customers about how we were making it a better business for them. So we are public figures, I suppose, in the truest sense of the word.
But you were all in the business of buying big sites, big sort of retail investments in real estate. But today, of course, digital seems to be the play. Do you think that actually digital is the game changer for supermarkets and the retail sector more generally?
Well, I think the retail sector more generally, it's a well-trodden path that, you know, absent digital in your offer, you're in big trouble if you're just a bricks-and-mortar high street retailer. It is smaller in grocery retailing. The online businesses at Tesco, at Sainsbury's, were started on my watch and Terry's watch because it's been long in the making. It's a small but very important part of the mix in food. It's around 5 or 6%.
But growing, presumably.
It is, but for most people, it's part of their overall relationship. They still do by far the vast majority of their shopping in-store, be it a big, perhaps out-of-town supermarket or a small convenience store, which we're much more familiar with now, too.
Now, when you look at the big proposed merger between Sainsbury's and Asda, good for customers or good for shareholders?
Well, in my view, there's nothing that's good for shareholders that isn't good for customers. It has to be good for customers first. Otherwise, long-term, it can't be good for shareholders. Now, the Competition and Markets Authority are the official body in the UK who will determine whether it's good for customers. If you listen to what those businesses are saying about their intention, they're talking about buying goods more cheaply and passing the benefit on to customers. So clearly, they're making a case for why it's good for customers.
What's your gut feel? Do you think we're going to have a better supermarket at the end of this if it goes through?
Well, my view is that I should leave that decision to the current chief execs. I left 4 years ago. But what I would say is this, which is that ultimately what supermarkets do is represent customers in the supply chain, in the producers. And the likes of Coke and Pepsi, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, these big international businesses don't need any protecting from supermarkets. Supermarkets are there to represent customers.
But it strikes me that you wouldn't have been the sort of chief executive that would have been sort of humming, "We're in the money," if you'd done that deal, would you?
Well, television's a tough judge, as we all know.
And
you're
we're not
never
even
quite
halfway
sure
through
when
the interview
camera's
yet.
off. That's quite right, no. But look, the reality is that supermarkets and retailers more generally exist, many of them since the mid-Victorian era, to represent customers, and that's what they should do.
I mean, one group you have sort of called out in a Times interview is that farmers and suppliers may well suffer in this merger. Is that where we need to watch out in terms of where the pressure in the chain suddenly comes to become much more real in terms of being a supplier to a business like Asda and Sainsbury's merging?
Well, supermarkets, in representing customers in that supply chain, have to make sure that that supply chain is profitable, sustainable and vibrant. And if you look at my track record at Sainsbury's, we went to great lengths to be the customer of choice to farmers and small suppliers in the UK. But conversely, the big international branded businesses are actually bigger and more powerful than the supermarkets. And when you're
can name the price for the
when you're
deal.
having a bit of a duff up with them on behalf of customers, I think that's a good thing to do.
But when you're an entrepreneur and you're pitching to, a big company like Sainsbury's, is there a trick to this, or is it just luck?
Well, I think the key thing is to be passionate in your belief in your product, because if you don't believe in it, nobody else will.
Right.
But also to pick your fights. I think one of the things I learned from a lot of small suppliers was that they were knocking on everybody's door at the same time. It spread to them much too thinly, but also it meant they didn't have a clear story as to why you. As supermarkets want to be loved too. There's nothing quite like a supplier
The cuddly
sitting...
supermarket chief execs.
Yeah, well,
we should feel sorry for you all.
Well, I'm not quite going there, but when you're sitting there across from a buyer, if you're saying, "I'm here with you because my product should be stocked in your store because the customers that I think my product is right for shop mostly in your shop," that's a different pitch from saying, "I'm knocking on 10 doors and I'm hoping you're going to be the first to say yes."
OK, right. Want to move on to the high street.
Yeah.
50,000 jobs allegedly gone since the beginning of this year on the high street. We're looking at a pretty grim period ahead for bricks and mortar retailers. You've already sort of inferred that as it comes to digital, but is there something else that's going on in terms of the way we react to old school shopping?
Well, I think it's wrong to characterise this moment in time as fundamentally different from what's happening in the high street for tens and tens and tens of years. It's the most...
We've got Amazon, right?
But it's the most vibrant part of our business.
It was a river a few years ago.
Well, and it still is, to be clear. But this is a vibrant part of our business landscape in the UK. I saw a speech someone did a couple of weeks ago where they went A to Z of retail brands that once existed that don't anymore. You've said this headline figure of 50,000 people, and it may be right, but 30,000 people were working in Woolworths the day Woolworths went bust around 10 years ago. So we
this
see
is just
it
what
regenerate.
happens.
It is, but the focus at the moment is that I think we've seen three things collide at the same time. We've seen product cost go up, partly in a post-Brexit world and a weaker pound because so much is bought in euros and dollars. The cost of people, the key resource in retail, forced up by the minimum wage accelerating very fast, and we're seeing good businesses like Sainsbury's and Waitrose
So the overheads are on the up.
So overheads are on the up. And then, on top of that, you have property costs. And I've been very vocal for around 10 years now about the fact that saying business rates, the key property cost, is an unfair tax in that it unbalances competition.
Because this is something that the digital suppliers don't really have to sort of deal with in anything like the same way, the taxation regime. I mean, if you...
But they use the services those taxes pay for. When Amazon deliver to your home in a brown cardboard bag, you either take it to the tip or a dustman picks it up, and that dustman is paid for by the business rates of the high street retailer that just lost that sale.
So if you
it's
were
part of the competitive mix.
So is, let's say a lot of people thought and hoped you would become Prime Minister. So Prime Minister's King's
Except
regime,
me,
except you. I mean, but if you were in that role, is this about incentivising the high street or penalising digital, do you think?
It's neither. It's about levelling the playing field. A small change in the way that we tax property-intensive businesses, which is really a proxy for retail, could make all the difference. In the end, who wins should win because they do a better job for customers. They shouldn't have a tax advantage in that competition landscape.
But presumably if you were just starting out again, you'd be a digital entrepreneur, wouldn't you?
No, look, I'm not sure I would, because if you look, apart from the fact I'm not sure I have the skill set to do it, if you look at what many digital businesses are doing now, they're working out how they also have a physical presence. Look at Amazon. What's the biggest corporate thing that Amazon have done in the last 3 years? They bought Whole Foods, a bricks and mortar food retailer in America. Now, I don't suppose they bought them for Whole Foods technology. I'm guessing they bought them because they think Whole Foods run fantastic shops and understand how to run a food supply chain. And to be a great retailer in food, you need to do those things well.
Right. We're going to have to leave it there because we're going to go to the break. Now, you've heard it here first. There is hope yet for the high street. And when we come back, we're talking deal or no deal. No, we won't be swapping Justin out for Noel Edmonds, but we will be talking the potential of private equity and what next for that big B question, Brexit. We'll see you soon. Welcome back. Now, my guest today is supermarket royalty, Justin King. Justin, welcome back to part two.
Thank you, Michael.
Let's move on from the supermarket aisles. Well, let's try that.
Yeah,
now, you left them behind for the polished floors of private equity. You're in a completely different part of the economy. Have you found your feet yet?
I'm working on it, I guess. Look, I'm having a load of fun. I mean, I've joined a business in private equity. I'm working with Guy Hans, who's pretty well known in the field. And we've got this incredible variety of companies, which I'm responsible for. You know, I've got a cattle ranching business in Australia. I've got a solar power business in Italy. I've got a couple of businesses here in the UK, including a retailer, Yvale. So I'm still keeping...
So complete variety.
Yeah, and for me, that's been fantastic.
But private equity, I mean... Guy Hans is a big character. The Evening Standard described him as the industry's panto villain. I mean, in terms of actually a very different type of character than you're used to working with. What's it really like when you get into it? I mean, most of us only imagine what private equity must be like. What's it like when you're on the shop floor?
Guy's got a fantastic, small team, but a fantastic team, about 80 people who he's built up over 20-odd years in the industry. And the partnership that he and I, along with Andrew Gatesy, who's joined us too, a former banker, are trying to create is something that doesn't just look at the financial structuring of the business. That's what a lot of people think private equity is about, but also about genuinely building better businesses. That's all I've done all my life, is I've started businesses in corporate structures or turned around businesses. And ultimately, where value is created is by taking a business that, for whatever reason, is underperforming and making it a better business. That's what we do.
Have you learned something new about yourself in this arena, or is it just applying what you learned at Sainsbury's and before in a different environment?
Oh, well, I mean, I've said to lots of people, I've learned more in the last 2 or 3 years than I've probably learned in the last 10, because it's been such a step into a different world. But it is also the second half of your question. Everything that you've learned along the way turns out to be really useful. You know, how to lead and direct people, how to prioritise a strategy, to focus on the big things that really matter and not let little things get in the way.
Do you think sort of the body of business more generally really gets the value that private equity can bring? I mean, it sometimes gets a bad reputation, right, in terms of...
Well, it inevitably gets a bad
return.
It gets a bad reputation when it has failures, but the nature of taking on really difficult business challenges is sometimes you'll get them wrong. And, you know, the big wins tend to go a little bit unnoticed because the money's returned to investors and they're very happy, and the failures get noticed a lot because they're often done in the blaze of publicity of the headlines.
Have you worked out how you pick a winner?
We've got to buy a few businesses. Well, all I've been working on since I've got there is the businesses we already own, but we're in the final shortlist to buy the network rail estate of the 5,000 arches. Now, as a retailer, that excites me a lot because they're, on the whole, retail...
What can you do with 5,000 arches?
Well, they're already full. I mean, they're full of vibrant, small, medium-sized businesses. You know, metal bashers, car washing, right the way through to... Yeah, but also retail space as well. And, you know, it's sat in network rail. It's not their primary purpose. That's running a safe and efficient railway. And we think we can build a really great business there. So you can make massive
value out of stuff that looked like economically redundant space.
Yeah, we think we can build a great business there.
When you look at the entrepreneurial scene and you look at the investments that you can make, I mean, essentially, what do you make of the UK these days? Do you think it's a good place for private equity investors, or does it need to get better?
Well, I think that part of the challenge of private equity is there is a little bit of it, which is where there's muck, there's brass. You know, we're looking for things that are going wrong and trying to make them better.
So you're looking more for the trouble.
So we're looking for trouble, yeah, sort of, I suppose. And look, you know, we have a view that Europe and the UK at the moment is a very challenging period. So that ought to be a very interesting period for private equity.
Right. So I mean, actually, we'll get on to Brexit in a minute, but before that, I mean, a lot of people, when you announced the fact that you were going to leave Sainsbury's, I mean, we'd have seen you on Question Time, we'd seen you as this very public face. A lot of people thought that actually the future for Justin King might be in government, might become chairman of the FA, it might be something about sport being your big passion.
Yeah.
What was the deciding factor that took you back into the front line of business and actually into a troubled part of the business environment in terms of turnarounds?
Well, that was kind of the deciding factor. I mean, I think the combination of that variety in one place, lots of businesses in areas that I, at least initially, we didn't know a lot about. I've got to learn them since. And also turnarounds. I mean, it is what I've done. You know, I was part of the turnaround team back at Asda in the 1990s. I had a short period re-establishing the food business.
So you like that sort of work?
It's what I enjoy doing. Yeah, you know, change is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm not a solid state kind of guy.
Would you rule out more of a kind of public sort of role?
Well, I think I sort of have by the choices I've already made. I mean, in the sense of public, do you mean by that elected political?
Well, it
that
could
doesn't
be.
interest me.
Stuart Rose went into the House.
Yeah, but he's gone in with a party political brief, and I think one of the things that business people have the opportunity to do, and it's why I did it when I was at Sainsbury's in particular, is to see a much broader perspective and be prepared to stand up and be counted. And you know, truth is, a lot of business people prefer to stay under the radar, and I personally believe that lets down their customers, it lets down ultimately their shareholders, because we should have a bigger voice in this economy, a bigger voice than we have today.
Let's move on to a political issue that you do have a view about, because you've said that UK shoppers are completely in the dark about the consequences of the vote that they've just made to come out of the European Union. Why?
Well, right in the middle of the debate, you mentioned Terry Leahy earlier. Terry, myself, and Mark Bowen, who was running M&S at the time, wrote a letter which I think made the front page of the Mail on Sunday, and it said, we really don't understand the impact Brexit is going to have on our food supply chains. Our food supply chains have been completely created in the 40 years or so that we've been in the European Union, and as we sit here today, 80% of the time journey since the vote, so 8/10 of the time has been used. We still don't know what Brexit looks like. Do
you think it was worse than you expected or better where we are right now?
Sadly, it's about what I expected. You know, look, there was a debate early doors after the referendum where this idea that people knew what they voted for. It simply wasn't true. People know why they voted. I'm sure that's true, but they couldn't possibly know what they voted for because we still don't know what we voted for.
Do you think that business stood up enough in that debate? Do you think there were enough people like you talking about what the potential effects were going to be?
Well, no. I mean, it felt a pretty lonely place to be a business person standing up and being counted. I understand the pressures, and if you look at just in recent weeks, as businesses are starting to say, March is racing towards us. We still don't know how we're going to run our business come March, and they're getting shouted down when they do it. So
when you hear the Foreign Secretary use an expletive and add it to the word business, is that because business is starting to be the right problem in terms of raising its concerns, or do you think that they just really don't get it in terms of what the public actually want out of this vote?
Well, a successful business community has been the bedrock of this fantastic country for hundreds and hundreds of years. Ultimately, successful business creates employment, creates opportunity, pays taxes, funds everything that we hold dear, the NHS and the whole support system in this country. And to have an idea that somehow business is the enemy seems to me to be a breakdown of that fundamental
maybe not
truth.
the enemy, but Ian Duncan Smith said, business always calls it wrong on the big issues, whether it's the euro, whether it's Brexit, that actually big business likes big institutions. The future's more entrepreneurial.
I just think that's a ludicrous observation. I mean,
he made it, not me.
Well, and I still think it's a ludicrous observation. Business in all of its forms, from the big legacy businesses that are still a big part of our lives today, like Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer's, to the new vibrant economy that we're seeing creating employment, to the literally tens of thousands of small businesses up and down this country creating employment initially for themselves and then for other people, that is the bedrock of our society. We are all entitled to an opinion. And we are all heading towards a date which is less than 9 months away now, where we don't know the basis on which we are going to be able to do business with our key trading partners. That seems to me to be a big problem.
A big problem. But you are used to being cast as the optimist that sorts out the big problems. Do you still remain optimistic about our chances of actually sorting this, or are we up a creek without a paddle?
Oh, I'm always optimistic. I know
Where's the paddle coming from?
No, look, I'm always optimistic because, you know, in the end, I think my grandmother used to say necessity is the mother of invention. And
so we'll work it out.
We are heading towards the point where we are going to have to work it out. But what we're seeing, and we must be close to that point, I would suggest, is that people are starting to get quite brutal in laying out where their hard lines are. But I think what we'll find, a lot of these lines being drawn in the sand at the moment will turn out to be much more malleable than perhaps those that are saying these things intend us to believe at the moment.
Right, so in terms of 5 years' time, do you think we'll have a better or worse economy than the one we're living in right now?
Well, I believe we should have remained. I believe that Brexit damages our economy. So, by definition, I believe that the day we took the decision to leave, we condemned ourselves to a less vibrant economy in the future. I still believe that's the case. But we must make the best of this bad job.
So we're going to make the best of a problem?
Yeah.
There's still optimism on the table.
Of course.
Justin King, thank you very much indeed. And that's all we have time for this week. And thanks once again to my guest, Justin King. He was the business leader that urged us to live well for less. And while you'll have many a Westminster Politico telling you can get more for less, Justin's time at Sainsbury's was proof positive of the proposition. And it's why he's one of the legends of the British business scene. And he's been my guest today. And that's it. Join us for the next Capital Conversation. I'll see you then.